My name is Julie Kaplan, and I'm the Manager of Public Programs at the Center for Jewish History. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's program, which focuses on the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization, Volume 1, Ancient Israel, from its beginnings through 332 BCE, and features Posen Library editor and biblical scholar ALISON JOSEPH in conversation with DEBORAH Dash Moore, Editor-in-Chief of the Posen Library. The Center for Jewish History plays a vital role as a renowned research institute for scholars, as well as a destination for public programs and exhibitions, and a place to explore genealogy. Our partners, the American Jewish Historical Society, the American Sephardi Federation, the Leo Baeck Institute, Yeshiva University Museum, and the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, together possess the largest repository of Jewish archival material outside of Israel. I'd like to thank two of our partners, Leo Baeck Institute and YIVO, for co-sponsoring this program, and the Yeshiva University Museum for allowing us to feature some objects from their collections during the talk. Just a couple of technical notes. First, you're welcome to submit questions for the Q&A portion of our program using the Q&A function visible on the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions throughout the program, but please note that the chat function has been disabled. Second, the program is being recorded and will be available on the Center's website and YouTube channel soon. We will email you the link as soon as it's available. Now I'm pleased to introduce DEBORAH Dash Moore, who will lead the conversation with ALISON JOSEPH. DEBORAH is the Editor-in-Chief of the Posen Library of Culture and Civilization and the Frederick G. Huetwell Professor of History at the University of Michigan. Her most recent book, Jewish New York, The Remarkable Story of a City and a People, covers over 3 centuries of history and culture. Thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Julie, for this lovely introduction. I'm going to introduce ALISON to you in a moment, but first I thought I would introduce the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization. We have a short video that gives you a sense of its broad scope. And I think you will enjoy watching this. So that gives you a taste of the Posen Library. It's a real pleasure to introduce my colleague, ALISON JOSEPH. I think there's actually a little slide with her picture on it that you can see too. She's been working with us as senior editor on the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization, and her own expertise is in the Hebrew Bible and ancient Judaism. She worked very closely, in fact, with the two co-editors, Dr. Jeffrey Tigay and Dr. Adele Berlin, on this volume on ancient Israel. She has also years of university teaching, research, and publication in Jewish studies, as well as doing digital scholarship of her own. She brings the content, as you'll see, of the Posen Library alive in really wonderful ways. Alison earned her PhD in Eastern Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and also has an MA in Jewish Studies from Emory. Her first book, Portrait of the Kings, the Davidic Prototype in Deuteronomistic Poetics, received an award. And she is also the co-editor of Reading Other People's Texts, Social Identity and the Reception of Authoritative Traditions. Her own research interests include gender in the Hebrew Bible and popular culture, biblical historiography, and feminist historiography. And as that slide indicates, she also has a great deal of teaching experience. So, Alison, it would be really nice if we can start this together. And we've called the program New Ways of Reading the Bible in the 21st Century. Which leads me to ask, since this is also obviously about the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization, what's new in this Posen Library volume? For 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been reading the Hebrew Bible, right? You know, I know, I'm sure all of the people participating here know this. So what new ways are available to us to read it in the 21st century that can be gleaned from the Posen Library, Volume 1 on Ancient Israel?
So the ways that we've organized and the selections we've made of what to include really fall into several different areas. First, we've organized the biblical text by genre. So taking it out of its canonical context, different from the way you'd find it in a printed Bible, pulling it out and collecting it by genre. We've also included extra biblical material that was produced by ancient Israel. We've included illustrations of things that might tell us more about what's happening in the text or how we can understand the text. And we've also included extra biblical non-Israelite material. So, for example, an illustration of something happening in the text is this item here. This is a lot, an Assyrian lot in from the 9th century BCE, so it's quite old, and it in Akkadian it is called Puru. So a lot of the Puru, and we see this, and we want. Oh, can we stick with the lot, please? Okay, so this lot, when we think about the holiday of Purim, that is narrated in the biblical book of Esther. We know the story that the villain Haman draws lots to decide what day he's going to kill all of the Jews. So from our modern context, we don't really know what those lots are. Did he draw straws, pick it out of a hat, any of these things, you know, and we've this item from the 9th century BCE from a neighboring culture has been unearthed. And we see that the writing on it tells us a little bit about different things that are going to happen in the year. So you would throw it like a die, and then you would read what it said on it. So perhaps this is what they were talking about when Haman draws his lots.
Could you give a sense of how large this is?
So it's not large. I think that it is, you know, a small item, and it has Akkadian writing on it that gives us a sense of different things about the calendar year. So another example, we can see these are Assyrian slings and sling stones. So from the 8th century BCE. So if you think about the famous story of David and Goliath, right? David, the little shepherd boy, comes up against the Philistine giant, and he takes his slingshot, and the first Goliath taunts him, "Are you coming? Do you think I'm a dog coming to me with sort of this kind of weapon while everyone else is in the armor and everything?" And he shoots him with this slingshot. So when I imagine this story, I always thought of that kind of like that Y stick with the rubber band that you would pull it back and release it. And so what we see here, two illustrations, one on the right, this Assyrian relief that it shows slingers in battle, that they took this kind of leather with a cord or strap or something, and they would take these little round rocks and they would swing it over their heads and release it. And it could travel 100 to 150 miles per hour. So that's a really different kind of view, or it lends a much more realia to the story of David and Goliath that we can't get from just reading the biblical text, because all we kind of have is our modern context to imagine what it looks like, plus all the children's books, they all draw it like with that the Y stick and the rubber band. But these kind of artifacts help us to understand better what might have been happening.
So you mentioned that it's organized by genre. So what does that really mean when you say organized by genre? Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have a slide with the table of contents. Okay, so here we have the table of contents, and you can see that what we've done is take the various pieces, different texts throughout the Hebrew Bible, which really encompass it, even though we consider it sort of one book. We print it today, maybe in one volume, that the texts that are included really come from lots of different genres. We have prose stories that begin with the creation of Israel, creation of the world, continue in the story of the patriarchs, and on until after the return from exile. We have legal texts, we have prophetic texts. And so what we've done is establish these genres and pulled the text out from the different narrative contexts of where it exists in the canon, to then print it side by side. So some examples of what you can really get from this is, for example, a genre that I would never really have thought of, genre of blessings and curses. So we pulled together the priestly blessing, that here we have an artifact of, these are very small, they're about, the larger one is about 4 inches and the smaller one is about 1.5 inches, silver scrolls that were rolled up, and maybe the thread was put through them, and it was worn as something like an amulet. And through all sorts of different scientific methods, they were able to read it, they were able to unroll it without it being totally destroyed, because these items are from maybe the 7th to the 5th century BCE. And we see on these amulets, it talks about blessing God, Yahweh, who kept the covenant, and may God bless you and protect you. May God cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And we see this in the blessing, but it's also what we see in number 6. And this blessing, the Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and gracious with you. The Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace, which is in Numbers, but it's also part of often family Shabbat traditions of parents blessing their children it's part of the service, that this was considered the priestly blessing. And here we have not only the written version of the prayer, but the blessing that would have been worn in some kind of amuletic fashion. So here we have another blessing, and it's sort of hard to see in the picture, but above that handprint there it looks like chicken scratch, but that is actually the blessing here. That this was found in a tomb. That it asks that that the guy who wrote it on this tomb, that he be blessed and delivered from his enemies. And so it was really interesting to take these blessings, both these extra biblical blessings from these items and what we see in the text, and put them together in a way that maybe I wouldn't have thought of before. And pulling them out of the text, especially when the blessings are sort of really stuck into a larger narrative context, we don't really spend the time to look at them. So for example, Jacob's deathbed blessing of his 12 sons. So we pulled it out and we put it in this section about blessings and curses. Or from this coming week's Torah reading, Isaac's blessing of Jacob and Esau. That this is a narrative that's full of so much drama and fighting and sibling rivalry that we barely take the time to think about the blessing itself, because it's sort of within the context of this narrative plot. And so by pulling it out, we get to look at these blessings side by side. That really sort of enhances the way that we're reading the text.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can see how interesting it is, the juxtaposition one next to the other. You know, one of the things I've noticed with the volume that I really love are the illustrations, many of which come from neighboring cultures. And I think that these influence how we read the biblical text, but I'm curious how you think of how it changes or enhances our understanding of biblical texts.
Well, I think one of the things that we try to highlight is that the texts we're looking at are produced by the culture of ancient Israel. This is not something that was created in a vacuum. It's not just the Israelites decided to say these things one day, but that they really are producing. It's really a cultural production, and it reflects the cultural milieu around them. So, for example, this mural is from Thebes from the 15th century BCE, and it shows Egyptians making idols. So the idea of making idols and idol worship is something that's really, that the biblical text is working in opposition to. But this is, you know, sort of a regular practice that would have been depicted by other peoples around. And so it gives us a sense of, what are we talking about? You know, everybody's making idols. This image here, this is one of my favorite my favorite artifacts of the entire volume. This is idol quickening instructions from Babylonia in the 6th century BCE. And so what does that mean? This was instructions for some kind of ritual that you would do once you created an idol. So if you think back to the famous rabbinic story about Abraham in his father's idol shop, and he smashes them, and he says to the old man, like, why would you worship you're an old man, why would you worship this thing that was born yesterday? And when we think about this, you just think, you're like, oh, this is kind of stupid. Like, why would these people think that these were gods? And so now we have this ritual that's showing that they did some kind of performative act that transforms it from that lump of clay that was molded into a shape of a something, and really kind of deify it. And so that it's not just that, like, the way that the rabbis are quite condescending about it, that, you know, why would you ever think to worship these idols, you just created them, but instead that there's a recognition of that this performative ritual happened. And so this text is describing how you would do this ritual. So those are just sort of local things that we get from the culture, especially in response to the text that all the time is talking about how bad idol worship is. The idol worshipers are going to turn you away. Don't marry foreign women because they're going to turn you towards idol worship. That's a major theme throughout the entire biblical text. And so these illustrations just give you a little bit of the local culture of what they're responding to. Here we have a drawing of an Assyrian relief of chariots trampling some people. This is from the late
Really
8th century
yeah.
BCE. And what we see here is that this is not necessarily specific to the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel, but it's showing how the Assyrians sort of overpowered everyone in the area. And so we know that in the around 721, the Assyrian army conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. And so here we have a depiction of probably in some kind of victory relief, demonstrating how the Assyrians kind of ruthlessly conquered these areas. The next image that I'm going to show you these are modern images, actually, from 1915. And the reason that we included these are just to illustrate what we're talking about. So in the beginning of the prophetic book of Joel, it talks about, it makes an analogy of like a nation invading the Holy Land to a swarm of locusts. Or if you think about the 8th plague, why was it so bad? You know, the locust doesn't sound quite as bad as most of the rest. But this is what happens in a locust swarm. You can see in the top left, a very healthy looking tree. In the bottom left, we have the locust coming, and very quickly we have this really desolate looking tree that the locust swarm just came through. And this was sort of the effect of what happens when you have a locust swarm. And I think for us who don't live in agrarian cultures, trying to understand what these things are like or why it's such a big deal. You know, I've been to camp in the summer. There are a lot of mosquitoes, but nothing on the level of saying that, oh, this is a plague. But you can see from these images how really devastating something like this could be.
Yeah, this is really incredible. You know, all these examples make me think about how we tend to think of the biblical text as unique to ancient Israel, right? This is its text. But one of the things that the volume does, and you know, the illustrations are part of it, but also there are texts, it reminds us of conversations, as it were, that were going on during the period. And through them, we often get a glimpse of what was believed and what was discussed. So there's one of the things that I'm really curious about. You have an illustration of a hybrid creature with 6 wings, all right? What was the conversation there? What was going on? Why didn't
here we have this item, the hybrid creature with 6 wings, from the 10th or 9th century Syria. So very close to ancient Israel. And we put it next to the text of Isaiah 6. So Isaiah 6 is when the prophet Isaiah sort of gets his prophetic commission and God comes to him, and there are these flying seraphs that they have 6 wings and they're calling out to him. It's this very kind of weird scene. And so if you just read Isaiah 6, you say, oh, this is kind of a weird thing. What are these creatures? Why do they have 6 wings? Why is this weird thing happening to Isaiah that this is going to send him off now on his prophetic mission? And we see from items like this that this kind of mythical creature was just sort of something that was in the air, that this was a kind of mythical, maybe scary, we don't really know, figure that you might see. So that the Israelites are really influenced by these the existence of the mythology and the kind of figures that that come from the surrounding culture.
I like the notion of rather of influence of conversation, right? Of that's going on. Yeah, yeah. So here's a Phoenician ship, and it has Nineveh. Well, we know a story about Nineveh, right?
Right. Well, so we know a story about Nineveh, about a guy who flees on a ship, and then to continue to hide, Jonah goes down into the belly of the ship, and God sends this big storm, and everybody doesn't know what to do. And there we have them drawing lots again. So maybe they had one of those puru to draw the lots. But here's a depiction of a Phoenician ship that you can see that it's clearly not a realistic depiction, but you see that it's sort of the soldiers on the top, soldiers and passengers on the top deck, and that the oarsmen below, so that the ships were built in this way that had levels. So that sort of tells you, oh, when Jonah goes down into the bottom of the ship and takes a nap, and then this big storm, maybe he's down there with the oarsmen. So we just start to see, like, the Bible certainly in its ancient context is not illustrated, but can we find illustrations from the surrounding cultures that help us to envision? And I think that's one of the things that we've really done in this volume, bringing these different images that help us to understand, like with the lot, or envision what the text might be talking about.
Yeah, that's a gorgeous illustration. I really love it. So just to go to the realm of text, an important part of Torah, of course, are the laws. Are there conversations going on there as well? Or I know you have non-biblical legal documents. How does that help us understand the Torah laws themselves?
So first, I think with any kind of the essential nature of law, we never really know, is this law in place because people were doing stuff you didn't want them to do? So they made a law to prevent everyone from doing it. Or is this law there because it reflects what everybody was doing? So let's create a law and say that, this is sort of our custom, so we're going to codify it in law. And so when we have the Torah, we can't ask the ancient Israelites, did you really follow this Torah? When Ezra and Nehemiah say, oh, we're going to establish this as your constitution, did they really establish it as their constitution? We don't know. We're all these things that happen when you're supposed to stone this one, and all these different punishments. What were people really doing that, or does it reflect some kind of idealized, utopian, dystopian kind of reality? So we don't really know that. So the best ways that we can figure out whether people were actually following the laws or not following the laws is when we find other legal texts from ancient Israel that are not in the Torah. And so this one here, from the end of the 7th century BCE, it's actually the only extra biblical legal document that was found in Israel before the Babylonian exile. So it's kind of our oldest Israelite legal text that exists. And it's a document from Mitzad HaShivyahu, which is somewhere kind of between Tel Aviv and Ashdod. And can we go back to the previous slide? Okay, so what this is a legal complaint, and there was some kind of field worker, and he had to give as a collateral, I guess, to get paid. He would give his garment, and then he would do the harvesting, and then when he would finish his harvest, he would turn it in, and then they would return his collateral garment. But this worker appeals to the magistrate to say, my supervisor, I did what I was supposed to do. when your servant had measured his harvest and stored it in the granary as always, uh, Hoshayahu, son of Shobai, came and took your servant's garment. It was then I had measured and completed my harvest as always, and he took your servant's garment. He's incensed by this, and everybody's going to testify that he did the right thing, but please, governor, get him to return my garment. And so what is this about? In Exodus 22, we have a law that says if you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you must return it to him before the sun sets, right? So it was maybe his cloak. People didn't have a lot of clothes. Maybe he needed it for evening when it got cool. You're supposed to return it in the evening. And so here we see with the parallels of these two texts that this is a law that people put into practice or were violating in this case, right? That the guy took his garment and didn't return it. And so it gives us sort of this eye onto like, oh, this was sort of a law on the ground. This is something that people were doing.
That's really great. I mean, I love that relationship of the letter. I mean, the letter is so cool.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that you get from the genre organization, because we put both of these items, the biblical and the extra biblical, into a section about the genre of legal texts.
Right.
And so otherwise you wouldn't see that kind of connection between the legal. If you just saw it there in Exodus at sometime after they have the revelation at Sinai and they get a whole bunch of laws, you would miss it. And so here to put it together in a single section, I think really sort of highlights the kind of text that we're including.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about women, right? I mean, you do research on women. I'm interested in women, and there are stories about women, but they're sort of hidden, right, in the Bible. And if we're interested, we have to go search for them. So how does the organization that we have in this Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization volume help us to learn some things about women and their lives during this time period? Yeah. Where do the women appear? Yeah.
So to start, the genre organization actually makes it harder, I think, to find the women, rather than if you had a thematic organization and you're like, here's my section about women. And just like we pulled all the texts out of their various contexts to organize them by genre, if you pulled them out by theme, you would say, oh, here's a whole bunch of texts about women. That being said, we can still see within the genre organization ways that women appear. So, for example, Hannah is the mother of Samuel, and she, like the women of Genesis, is barren. She goes to the priest and she prays, and she's granted a child. And so after the child is born, she prays and is thankful for the blessing of the child. And so Hannah's prayer is featured in a section about prayer, whereas she's kind of a secondary character to this is sort of just part of the backstory of Samuel, where barren women are really a motif to say, hey, pay attention to this guy because something important is going to happen to him. But that by pulling out Hannah's prayer in this way, we give maybe a little bit more emphasis to it, rather than it just being sort of subsumed into the story of Samuel. The other way that we really see the lives of women is through some of the material culture. Here we have some jewelry and beads. We have a bone comb, which we're just talking about it. Another comb very similar to this was found, and maybe they found some like residue of lice on it, that this was seen as a lice comb. So if anyone has a modern lice comb, like I have a lice comb at home, it looks like this. It's these long prongs that are very close together. So here we have, just lice was probably a problem back then, maybe more than it is now, that you would have a comb that you could comb your hair with. So by not just highlighting text in this volume and trying to give a much broader view of what is ancient Israelite culture, we include these kinds of daily life things. I think what we find often in the Bible that it belonged to the male elite. And so the male elite often left the women out. And so by adding these different pieces of the ancient Israelite culture to help magnify, challenge, support, complement, all of these different items give us a fuller picture of ancient Israel. So we have some of these daily life items. Here we have a ring and a fibula, which, it looks kind of like a modern day safety pin. This is the kind of thing you would put on your tunic to hold the pieces together. It also is kind of decorative, but so it was part of your adornment. And then the other way that we see, so really through this material culture.
So, my namesake, my biblical namesake, Deborah, it's always been a favorite of mine. She has this great poem in her book. And Miriam also has, a poem as well of praise. We think of her more with dancing, I guess, or I do at least. But what happens when you put the poetry together, these two pieces of women's poetry? Yeah.
So in the beginning of the poetry section, our first two texts are first the Song of Deborah from Judges 5 and the Song at the Sea that Moses sings after they cross the Red Sea from Exodus 15. And these two texts are among the oldest that we have in the entire Hebrew Bible. But they're from very different parts of the Bible. The Song of the Sea from Exodus in the beginning, Song of Deborah from the book of Judges kind of in the middle, and here we put them together. And when you put them side by side, a lot of similarities and differences come out. They are both victory songs, calling on God, thankful to God. They both follow a kind of narrative triumph that is then expressed in the celebration of this song. And we see, the difference in the Song of Deborah, we see praise for the human roles of Deborah and also Yael, another woman who features in the story, compared to the Song of Moses, where we have, it's much more about God's role. And so then we have Moses sings this long song, and right at the end, it says, and Miriam took up her tambourine and led the women to dance, and she reprises one line of the song. And so here we have an image of a woman with a frame drum. This is probably kind of a ubiquitous kind of image of women or just men and women as musicians. But so what we see here is Moses gets this very long song, and Miriam just gets this one little line. But at the same time, they bother to include her, right? She repeats that by including her, we see that there's sort of an effort to democratize the experience of the celebration of the Exodus, because it's not just Moses leading the men in song, Miriam is leading the women, and so that they're all leaving. So you see both the contrast of Deborah gets a lot of space, really highly acclaimed. It is the only long poem like that that's put in the mouth of and attributed to a woman. The victory is attributed to Deborah. And then you compare it to this little puny thing of Miriam. But at the same time, that she's there. They could have just, it could have just gone on that Moses led the song and it was everybody and, keep moving. So we get that kind of role.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I have to ask you now, because this is part of a larger project, and I'm the editor-in-chief of it. So it's part of the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization. How does the volume relate to the other Posen volumes? Now, granted, we only half of the Posen volumes so far have been published. This ancient one, and then really volumes dealing with the modern period starting in 1750. Is there a way of reading the Bible today that connects with other time periods, including our recent time period? Yeah.
Certainly. So the way that you can see this, all of the volumes together, is on the Posen Digital Library. And I think we have a slide about that at the end at posenlibrary.com, where we have all of the contents of all of the volumes. So you can see this ancient volume with the modern material. And so, of course, you can't start Jewish culture and civilization without the Bible. Certainly, it really is the touchstone for the way that Judaism develops into the present day. And one of the things that I'm struck by, the way that you can search online, you could search for Passover. And so this is a letter from a Jewish garrison in Egypt from the late 5th century BCE, in which this is during the Persian period. So some kind of Persian minister sends an sends a letter, today it'd be an email, sends a letter to the Jewish troop telling them, this is how you have to celebrate Passover. On the 14th day, observe the Passover until the 21st of Nisan, don't eat unleavened bread, all of these kind of, all of the different regulations of Passover. So we have that from, 2,500 years ago. And then you fast forward into the future. The collection also includes this amazing narrative from a Union soldier, writing about the Passover he spent during spring 1862, where he was in West Virginia. And he goes on for this really hysterical account, talking about how he and his co-religionists put together this makeshift Seder in the woods of West Virginia. And so, more than 2,000 years apart, these soldiers are celebrating Passover in a very different way. I'll read a little bit of it because it really is so funny. Somebody sent some matzah on the train that they got it. Somebody went home to Cincinnati. They sent some matzah on the train. It came with a Haggadah and a little bit of cider. And then they kind of searched around what they were going to do. So they didn't have any horseradish. So they collected some herb that they thought would do the job. So he writes, we all had a large portion of the herb ready to eat at the moment I said the blessing. Each ate his portion. What horrors! What a scene ensued in our little congregation. It is impossible for my pen to describe. The herb was bitter and very fiery like cayenne pepper, and excited our thirst to such a degree that we forgot the law authorizing us to drink only 4 cups. And the consequence was we drank up all the cider. Those that drank more freely became excited, and one thought he was Moses and another Aaron, and one had the audacity to call himself a Pharaoh. And so it's really kind of amazing that you can see this kind of parallel experience of these Jewish soldiers celebrating the Passover, really separated in time, but really, that the entire anthology gives you the opportunity to try to put these texts together and into conversation. Other ways that we can read the Bible today. This is actually not something for our collection, but from our partner collection at the Center for Jewish History, from the collection of Yeshiva University Museum. And I wanted to bring these because, you know, we've been talking a lot about how do we read the Bible today, or in the 20th and 21st century, how is it still meaningful? And this is some kind of postcard depicting women of the Bible from the earliest 20th century Russia. And we see here some of kind of our usual suspects who we'd expect, the matriarchs in the depicted here. On the top right, we see Hagar, the handmaiden of Sarah, and mother of Ishmael, who I would not usually expect to see in these depictions. We see also on the bottom left, the daughter of Jephthah, who was sacrificed when her father made an oath. Also, I'm sort of surprised to see it here. And we have this kind of collage of these I don't know if they're drawing or paintings, but I think they're intended to sort of feel like photographs. And they remind me a lot of these like old movies where it's like a lot about the male gaze, and the women are posing in this, and they're sort of like playing cards. So this was such I thought, a really weird but interesting piece from the Yeshiva University Museum collection at the CJH that we could see, you know, modern ways of using the Bible. And the last image that also from the CJH collection, the Moses breaking the tablets. This is a painting mid-20th century. And we see this very kind of abstract painting of Moses on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, but he also kind of becomes the mountain. And below, we see the people having built the golden calf and celebrating around it. So there were a lot of things to me that were really interesting, the way that Moses becomes the mountain, but also this looks like a happy kind of, they are celebratory. The fact of the golden calf does not strike me as dark, or that the painter is really condemning them. And I just really thought, especially because of our partners tonight, to bring these images of the ways that the Bible continues to be relevant even today, beyond sort of religious contexts.
So thank you. I mean, these are all really wonderful. And I think, you know, we had a couple of questions just about, you know, how to get a hold both of the volume and also where to go. The volume is, we have a discount, which is available on one of the slides that you'll get to see. But if you just want to go and explore, you certainly can do so by going to the posenlibrary.com. Posen Library is one word, Posen, and go onto the website if you register. We also have some teaching clips for those of you who may be interested in learning more about specific examples here. So if we can come back to, I don't see on that slide, it doesn't have the discount, but I know we have it on one of the slides coming up. So I will point it out then. Yeah, that's the one that has a discount, 25% off, okay, which does make a difference. So if you're interested in purchasing the volume. I wanted to now ask you from our questions that we have gotten. One of the questions referred to the letters and whether you could give some examples of that. I know you mentioned a letter from Elephantine, right, to the garrison, but I'm sure that it would be interesting to see what these other letters might be about, because that was one of the genre categories. Yeah.
So we have other letters that figure into the biblical narrative. So, for example, in the book of Esther, Mordecai sends out letters. So we've excerpted these texts with the letters. We have included a number of letters from Lachish, letters that were coming through the area. that we have recorded about different kinds of grains and rationing and orders and all sorts of things that we that the letters, we actually get a great view of sort of some of the daily life and existing culture.
So one of the other questions asked about what the garrison was like. Can you speak a little bit about the Elephantine garrison? Did it have its own temple?
Okay, so so in 586 BCE, the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom of Judah and destroyed Jerusalem and exiled the people. Right. People went into Babylonia, but some people went, they went to Egypt, they went around. At some point, when the Persians conquer the Babylonians, they let people come back. But that Babylonian exile really becomes the beginning of the diaspora. And so what we see in Elephantine in Egypt is the Persian governors had established sort of a garrison there and sort of a Jewish presence, and they actually did have their own temple. There was it's sort of questionable, was this a rival temple to the temple in Jerusalem? Eventually, in the Persian period, it's rebuilt, the second temple. So, or was this the beginning of kind of more, or a return to a local worship? Because what we see at the end, after the destruction of the second temple, with the rise of the synagogue, worship is dispersed. But I think there's some evidence that in Egypt that they were doing sacrifices and they had their own temple there.
Wow. Okay. So to move from that to the postcard, and you mentioned Bat Yiftach, which was the image down at the bottom left on the screen. Can you say a little bit about that figure and why it was surprised that
Sure. So the daughter of Yiftach. So Yiftach was a judge. He's appears in Judges 11, the book of Judges, which comes in this period, sort of like right after the conquest of the land of Israel, before the monarchy is established. The book of Judges sort of fills in that time period, and it's filled with these little, often funny stories about individual judges who were sort of local clan heroes. So one local clan hero, Yiftach, goes out into battle and he says, "Oh God, if I win, I will make an offering of the first thing that greets me when I get home." So he's thinking like a goat is coming out the gate or something, and instead his daughter comes out. So any kind of reasonable person would expect like he would disavow the vow, offer something else, but the story goes on that he actually sacrifices her. So it's a totally weird story, and I think it's sort of a weird. I'm surprised that it's part of a representation there with sort of these other women, although she's seen as very righteous. She goes to pray. She's mourning the loss of her virginity, even though because she's going to die. So she complies with this. So maybe that's why she appears there. But in terms of, she's quite a tragic figure. So I don't know if I would have put her on the card, but she, I guess she has her virtues.
Yeah, I was surprised also because unlike Isaac, she ends up actually being sacrificed, right, which is really, really something. And So I think, among the questions that you had really has to do with the sort of the relationship of the visual to the textual. And, you've given us a wide variety of examples. And I wondered if you might just reflect a little bit about how text and image work together, how they complement each other. Maybe they contradict each other or something. It's not clear, but yeah, so that would be great.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because with the texts throughout the book, we've included about 100 images that go next to the texts. And so some of them figure like the examples I gave, the lot. Oh, what were they doing in Purim? Maybe they had this. What did the ship Jonah was on? Maybe it looked like this. Or so we have items like that. We have other things that are sort of demonstrating what's happening in the text, or filling in, like the idol quickening. Right? Why were they so crazy about idol worship? We have an item we didn't show today, a Egyptian mural that depicts the Egyptians circumcising. And so here we learn a little bit more about the culture. In many ways, circumcision is seen as a real identity marker throughout the Bible, as a feature of ancient Israel, in particular, in contrast to the Philistines, as seen as non-circumcised. But here we have all these Egyptians who were being circumcised. So it wasn't like the Israelites were the only ones. So we get to learn a little bit more about that. And I think that in terms of it's one of the really unique features, I think, of this volume, that you could pick up a Bible anywhere. You could go on the internet. You could read the Bible. You could read the Bible in your hotel room. Everywhere you can find the Bible. And one of the things that it's really quite amazing about this volume are the text with the text with these images that are complementing them and adding to our understanding of the text, as well as what we see in sort of getting the broader picture of what was life in ancient Israel like. Things that we don't know. We don't know what kind of pots they're using. We don't know what kind of clothes they were wearing. Sometimes we get little descriptions, but not anything that would help us to really envision it the way that we do when we see those reliefs of this, they had this kind of hat and this kind of belt and things like that. And so it's really sort of putting those two things together, I think, is really one of the treasures of this volume.
So thank you very much, Alison. It really has been great to talk with you about the volume. And let me just urge people to go to posenlibrary.com to sign up and explore yourself. It's free. You can register. We've put the discount code there available for you if you want to look at the actual volume, which is a really gorgeous, gorgeous volume there. And I think you would just got a taste of how exciting it is and how many new ways there really are to read the Bible in the 21st century when you're doing it through Volume 1 of the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization. So thank you all for coming.